All right, David, welcome to the campfire.
Man, glad to be here. Honored to be with you, Mike.
I appreciate it. I think that this is going to be one of those conversations that can be really influential on somebody,
Mm,
when they're struggling and they're looking at life in a way that isn't exactly helping them to go forward and it's just dragging them down.
yeah.
Because we're going to talk about perseverance.
Mm.
So let's jump right into it and talk to me about what authentically persevering means to you.
Man, it's a near and dear topic to my heart. It's funny. About 6 years ago, I met a clinical psychologist, Dr. Andy Garrett, who's in my mastermind group that I'm in, and he started introducing me, to some of these words that we've all been using for years. Grit and resilience and perseverance and authenticity and identity and intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation and all these, some of them kind of, sound a bit clinical and so on. But, um, it's, I think a lot of us are motivated. I don't know about you, but early on, I felt very externally motivated. This idea of persevering and grit, it really didn't come from an internal place. It was more about becoming someone, that the world admires, or at least not being a nobody, or, maybe, um, not looking, yeah, just not looking like a fool, kind of shame based, type of, a motivation. And, what I think is really interesting after I met Dr. Andy, you know, he I think a lot of these concepts were there, but he just really kind of crystallized and clarified some things for me. So if you don't mind, Mike, I'll jump into the deep end of the pool here. So
Go for
the,
it.
yeah, so the word authenticity, where do we get that? Everybody uses that word. Well, he's just being authentic, and I'm just authentic, blah blah blah. But I don't think a whole lot of people really understand what that word means. We get the word authenticity from the word author, and again, I'm gonna get, I'm not sure what you want to call it, religious or philosophical. Everybody gets to choose what they believe around that, but I'll share my perspective, and your audience can consider it here. But we don't we didn't make us, right? I didn't make me. I didn't choose my eye color. I didn't choose my taste buds. I didn't choose my skin color. I didn't choose where I was born and what family. And here's the fascinating thing. We think, of course, in the land of the free and the home of the brave, that we get to choose everything. Well, you don't even really choose your own personality. And it's amazing how hardwired, kids are out of the gate. I don't know if you have children or even siblings for that matter. They come out of the gate within just a matter of weeks and months, especially. You can tell how their little essence is so different from their brother or sister. And I mean, they're just very different. And of course, like us really sophisticated older people, little kids aren't thinking about being authentic, right? They're just doing their deal until, the world slaps them around a little bit, right? They get hurt, they get wounded, of course, in some cases neglected or abused. And maybe it's when they get into school or something, they get bullied or, insulted or whatever that might be. Well, then you start questioning, all of your kind of natural, right, authentic type tendencies, the things that you would normally gravitate to. And you kind of put on a mask, you put up a wall, and you're afraid to act, in alignment with the things that you really love to do and be about. Because what if somebody mocks that, right? What if somebody makes fun of that? What if your parents or your mentors or anybody, that's kind of older than you looks at you and says, man, that's no good. Well, that's a tough thing, right? Especially when you're younger, because we were designed to be raised, right? To be loved. I mean, caused to rise. That's where we get that word raised. And so here's what here's what I'll kind of put a pin in that. But the word, authenticity is really the driving force, in a healthy sense of perseverance. It's this internal, plumb line, this internal, set of standards and so on that you draw from. Like this idea is, Seth Godin said, people like us do things like this. You have a really clear understanding of who you are and why you're doing what you're doing. And that type of a person, again, we're all human, we have good days and bad days. That type of a person not only has a real magnetic type of a personality, but they're almost unstoppable, as opposed to someone who is just desperately trying to survive, right? And I've been there, or desperately trying to just, be somebody, or at least not be a nobody, right? You're looking for external applause or, pleasure from someone else that says, okay, you're finally good enough, that kind of thing. But so perseverance and grit, is, I think, is really established, by that internal plumb line. Who are we? Who am I? And who am I not? Right? Why am I different from my brother? Why am I different from my sister? What are the things that I believe about values, convictions, um, virtues? Those are all different things. And most people just kind of lump that stuff together in this idea you should be nice. Well, what is it that gives me goosebumps? Right? What is it that puts that lump in my throat in a good way? What is it that just pisses me off? What is it that breaks my heart? If you start identifying, right, identity, literally writing it down, all of those things that make you you, man, it's amazing how grit and perseverance and things like that can be established on a bedrock that is immovable.
What comes to mind actually
I
as
know
I'm
that was a lot,
listening,
by the way.
no, it was perfect. It was a setup because what actually really comes to mind is coyote medicine. And I'm not sure if you're really familiar with
I'm not.
the with the idea, but if you think about the fact that when we find ourselves in those really difficult moments that we're really buying into that story of self-suffering,
Mm-hmm.
it's built within the shame that we collect.
Mm.
And there's no greater example of that in nature than the story of the coyote.
Hmm.
Because in a lot of creation stories, he's the troublemaker that ends up bringing us out, right? And as we come out into the world, we craft the world, right? We make it ours. And
Hmm.
it scares all the different wildlife away, and they shun him as well. And it comes to a point where every story ends up how animals interact with us, they run away,
Hmm.
except for the coyote. And if you think about the fact that he's the one that made all these mistakes that brought us here and changed the world, yet he stayed. He learned how to persevere. He
Hmm.
learned how to adapt. And he learned how to change that story of shame and isolation that already imposed on him to be beneficial for his story.
Hmm. And I've never heard that type of a narrative or view. That's interesting.
It's one of those things that when I look back at, because we all have that collective bundle of shame,
Yeah.
it comes throughout our story, right? It's collected with each step that we walk and mistake we make. We always stop and look exclusively at that. We don't look back at the origin story, the very beginning of how we got here
Yeah.
and the things that we faced along the way. Because
Hmm.
we didn't have the vocabulary or the context then
Sure.
to look at that in shame the way that we do now. So when we would make a mistake as a kid, it wouldn't hold us back as hard as it does now.
Hmm. Man, that's interesting. Yeah, isn't it funny how, shame is such a powerful thing. It's a and obviously it's different than guilt, right? Shame is just this idea that we are nothing, and that we don't really deserve to breathe air, and everything that we do is wrong and bad, and we should feel, well, that whole phrase, right? You should be ashamed of yourself. Like it's just this collective blanket of darkness that a lot of people, end up, just accepting, and operating from that really sad place.
It is. And, as it collects, it does stop you. If you think
Yeah.
about when we were a baby and we learned how to stand and we learned how to walk, we fell a lot of times.
Man.
That was just the vocabulary and the muscle memory that we had. We got up and we kept going. And then you come down the line where that shame really collects and you start to put the mask over it. You start to mute that authentic voice of yourself. you're still making decisions and working through life with that same vocabulary in real time.
Mm,
And a lot of us really struggle to give ourselves that grace in
yeah.
order to dig ourselves out of those holes we make.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt about it. That's well said.
Which is where, it comes to that idea that we've got to take that journey inward, and we got to look at the environment around us, how it's serving us, how it's helping us craft a vocabulary.
Yeah.
And the more that we look at it and have those hard conversations with ourselves, the more that we can start to craft different things within
Mm.
the world around us that are going to help to pull us out of that. They're going to help to build a voice again.
Mm. I like I remember a while back when I was talking to Dr. Andy, he said, when you start to identify, that plumb line, he actually talks, his program is called the True North program. So he kind of breaks it down like, a true north versus, a compass, right? So a compass is, reading the magnetic field around it. And you're going to get close to north, right? But it's interesting, that kind of that metaphor there is, when you walk into a room or, well, any setting, we kind of read the room, right? We're kind of reading the field around us, and we're trying to decide, okay, who am I in this space? And again, we all kind of do it, and some more than others. Whereas true north is like, GPS coordinates. It's literally, written down and identified a very, he uses the term radical clarity on who you are. And what's really cool is, when someone asks you the right questions in the right sequence, it takes a bit of, takes a bit of self-awareness and deep work to kind of, maybe pull out that vocabulary, especially in the English language for that matter. But when you start to write those things down, it's really amazing how, you remove then what? You remove uncertainty. You really, you have then predetermined, how does somebody like me handle a situation like this, whether it's an opportunity or an obstacle? I mean, you've identified the impact you want to have, right? That dent in the universe kind of a thing, that's shaped, like Mike or shaped like David. I mean, you get, this idea of convictions. What do you believe is right and wrong, right? Are you just waking up in the morning and licking your finger and, going with the wind and whatever feels good? Yeah, good luck with that. And then this idea of values, right? What is the matrix that you're holding up in front of you to make decisions through? And man, it's amazing when you get really clear on that kind of stuff. Not only do you remove that question mark inside of you, but you remove the question mark over your head that everybody else feels. We all know the people that when they walk into the room, Andy Garrett calls these people authentic exemplars. We all know people, and usually over the course of our life, there's, three or four. But when they walk into the room gets wiser and safer and stronger and more joyful, as opposed to some people that walk into the room and, we joke about sucking the life out of the room. Well, what's the difference, right? Someone who walks into the room and has answered those questions, right? And again, I think it's mind, body, and spirit, right? You better answer the questions of what you believe about, and I'll put it this way. I heard somebody say this the other day. And again, everybody gets to choose what they believe here, but I think there's two questions that if you answer these things will make your life vastly better. Who is God? And what do I think that he thinks about me? That's a big deal because it's going to help you, not only view yourself, but view other people, right? You're not making it up as you go along. You're not trying to, fabricate some new paradigm that you get to establish and everybody else gets to establish their own paradigm. We got 6 billion people establishing their own paradigm. Well, what I think is really beautiful is when you establish what, we weren't made, right? The person who made me, who's that guy and what does he think of me? It changes everything. And it's amazing. I'm a dad. Mike, do you have kids?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. And my son's 19, he's in college, and my daughter's a senior in high school. And I love this idea, of looking at them. as the dad, right? As the father, and saying, "Hey, do you see what I see? Holy smokes. Like you're made of awesome, man." Or, or I have a boy and a girl, or, "Hey, sweetheart, do you see what I see? I want to get under and behind everything that you are and love and start to lift that up. I don't want you to be like your brother or sister. I don't want you to be like me or your mom." It's like, what is it that makes you tick, little buddy? We're going to get behind that and just pour gasoline on the fire, as it were. And what's fascinating though is again, when you start identifying those things that are authored, in you, and you remove uncertainty, you remove that question mark, and you realize, well, I guess I'm not the end all be all. I'm not God, and I can't just make it up as I go along. Boy, life starts to get really powerful and precious. You start standing on big rocks as opposed to trying to figure out some new paradigm every day. And it's amazing the psychological safety, that happens inside of that, those laws. And like gravity is, a law, right? Well, you know what else I think is a law? Is there's this idea that we're made of awesome. And I believe that with everything in me. I believe that about myself, finally. And now I look at other people, including you, and I'm like, that freaking guy's made of awesome. I wonder what makes him tick and what lights him up. And, it's, yeah, it's amazing how that eternal bedrock can start shifting things in a real hurry.
I feel like those two questions, though, they're like the groundbreaker for not only journaling, but for having those hard conversations with yourself
Yeah. Yeah.
that allow you the space to build a trail to
Yep.
get to that point where you realize just how awesome life can be.
Man, it's great. Yeah. Great word. Yep. And I think about this, this idea of, if I make something, I mean, I have an idea of what I want it to be. I have, the uses of it, the way that I want people to experience it and behold it and treat it, for that matter. And man, I just think that there's so much that's pointing to dignity and honor and love and truth and kindness and laughter, for that matter, right? And all of creation. By the way, you're an outdoorsman, right? And I just think everything is screaming, the way things are, from a monkey throwing his own poop, to a lion roaring, right? To a panda bear cuddling, to a snake, slithering. Everything is telling, again, I don't want to get too whatever philosophical here, but I think everything in creation is telling a singular story. There's one story that we've been grafted into, and it's beautiful, it's courageous, it's honoring. And when you start grabbing a hold of that and pouring steam on the fire and other people, especially young people, right? You start loving kids when they're just tiny, and you start causing them to rise and bring them up, pointing out the things in nature and everything from music to a hurricane that's telling the same story. Life starts to get really, really good.
It does, but it's about being willing to open yourself up to it.
Yeah, yeah,
You
you're
know,
right. Yeah,
you can see and experience all these things, but if you're not willing to open up your heart,
yeah,
you don't catch on to the true significance
yeah.
of
Well
what's going
said.
on.
Yeah, well said.
You mentioned the snake earlier, and snake medicine. It teaches us that we are not stuck where we're at.
Mm,
We may gain all these different skills that end up kind of silenced because of all that shame we pick up and stuff like that.
hmm
However, over the course of time, you're still shedding layers. You're still
mm,
changing. You still have that ability to reach in and pull out whatever said skill may be that you've learned in the past that's going to help you to overcome the adversity or make the adversity of the moment a part of your journey.
Isn't it great that, yeah, isn't it great that we can change? There's a lot of people that don't think that we can. In fact, science for the long, I mean, up until maybe the last 25 years has said that most of the time people don't change. They would tell people who were like even severe alcoholics and stuff like that, nope, you can't. And they would put them in an insane asylum. And now we're realizing I mean, literally, when you do brain scans, like new brain matter is growing, new neural pathways are growing, and it's because we, you know, yeah, we do change, and we can literally make like it's this idea that our, our brain is different than our mind, right? You can make up your mind. If I'm going to make up my mind to go walk across the street and get the mail or whatever it is, right? I can make up my mind to pour love all over my family. I can make up my mind to tear down my family and while tearing down myself for that matter, right? We can make up our minds. Our brains, well, they're kind of, they're thought factories, right? They just kind of roll and, take care of bodily functions and things like that and just kind of, do their thing. But our minds, of course, tied to our souls are much different. And I love the fact that, change inside of our minds and hearts can literally be scanned, on an MRI.
That's where we've come so far though as a society,
Yeah,
because I know, especially through my own mental health journey,
sure.
the labels that get stuck on you,
Oh,
man, those
oh,
things become you.
yep.
Over time they become your voice, they become your interactions, they become exactly who you are and what you do. And
Gosh.
it's so unfortunate because we're all looking for a definition in this world.
Yeah.
One of the biggest problems is the fact that we all look for somebody to give us who we are.
Yeah.
You
And,
know
and
what?
and you're right. We can't escape that, right? Every single child is either like, for instance, this is a quote I heard recently that if a mother tells her daughter she's beautiful, it's a compliment. If a father tells his daughter that she's beautiful, it's identity. It's amazing how those things are so different. And even as I say that, Mike, I get goosebumps, right? It's like a mother can give a compliment to her daughter, but a father, if he says, "Hey, sweetheart, you're so beautiful," it goes so deep inside of her. I didn't make that up, right? You didn't make that up, but there's an eternity woven into our words that we cannot escape. And you're right. We are given, this identity. We are given love. And just the opposite, like you said, we can, just a few words from someone, especially our parents, or lack of words, right? Indifference can absolutely destroy us. And it's scary and yet, kind of exciting and powerful at the same time because, even as if you didn't get that when you were growing up or you got wounded or you got PTSD or whatever that is, you can actually change when someone gives you love, right? I mean, and that looks like various things. It literally could be providing for you or helping you. It could be speaking into your life and reminding you, who God made you to be. It could be, very practical things, but love, the highest energy source, and again, I believe it's God, changes everything. And it changes our neural pathways. You can see it on a scan, but you can also see it, the opposite direction when it's absent.
I want to build on that because there's also the practice that you can do the self love thing. You can build all of this stuff internally within you. And then when you present it outward to your family or your loved ones or your friends, that's where the authenticity and that's where the power truly comes from.
Yeah.
Because you build the vocabulary within yourself and you trust.
Yeah. And, well, I mean, it's the golden rule, right? Love your neighbor as you love yourself. That's not a suggestion. And thank goodness it's not. It's a command. And here's the funny thing. The genuineness, right? The authenticity inside of us, that the ability for us to look in the mirror and say, "Man, I care for you. You're good. You're kind." And the times that you weren't, well, guess what? There's a lot of grace for that because desperate people do desperate things. And today, mercy was new this morning. And guess what? We get to swing for the fence again. But you're right. It's amazing how other people can, love you. But if you don't internalize that for yourself and accept it, and it's going to be a hard road.
And it gets back to the vocabulary. It gets back to the practice. And the willingness to open your heart to what it is that you're seeing.
Yeah.
I get out on the trail and I see it all the time with folks where we're just kind of like, tunnel vision. I want to blow through this trail. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. But how much of it did you actually miss? And I think that's a question that we don't ask ourselves enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Y-
It's
You
a
know,
lot more. Yeah.
especially say you found a favorite hiking spot and you return to it year after year after year. Well, the truth of the matter is, no matter how many times you show up there, is something is going to be different.
Mm,
And I think at the end of the trail, at the end of the hike, one of the best questions you can ask yourself is, what did I see that was new?
mm. Man, that's a really, really great perspective. And I think, yeah, a lot of times you've probably heard this idea of being a human doing versus a human being. And it's amazing how fast life can just get going and, we're doing this and doing that. And I remember it's probably been, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, we went to Glacier National Park and, I've never been there. Of course, I've seen pictures and it's unbelievable. Like it's just, I don't even know. I literally the first day we went hiking, I looked at my brother, and he was there with his family, and I'm I was standing next to this lake and looking up at this glacier and mountains and water, and I mean the water was just perfect, like this teal color, and you could hear on the far side of this lake, the ice kind of cracking, and I mean it was unbelievable. I looked at my brother and I said, "We're here, we found it," and he kind of smiled at me. I said, "It's the most beautiful place on earth. We found it." Well, here's the funny thing. The next 3 days, it was like you go around a corner and you find the next one. You find them, it just kept on compounding. And there were a few times, we had a pretty big group with us that they were hiking and they were a lot faster than us. And I'm like, that was their deal. They really enjoyed the exercise and the hiking. And I wanted to just really slow down and take it in. It was, there's a quote by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. She says, "Earth is crammed with heaven, and every bush afire with God. He who sees takes off his shoes. The rest sit round and pluck blackberries." It's this idea of seeing. You take off your shoes when you're standing on holy ground. Only those who see, right, behold it and will acknowledge that. But I think that to your point, it's, what we can stand on holy ground, whether it's on a podcast, whether it's with our little kid, or by the way, when it's looking in the mirror.
Mirror talks, and those can be some of the most difficult conversations
Yeah.
because they're one sided. There's no need to lie. In fact, there's really no ability to lie to yourself.
Yeah.
So the only thing that comes through is the truth.
Hmm.
Sometimes that truth can be very, very hard to digest, but within that truth lies the seeds for growth into the next stage, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Yeah, I think there's a lot of times, right? We have regrets and we're like, why in the heck did I do that or say that or keep doing that or, that kind of thing. And the beauty of it though is I believe that God uses those things to like they stack on top of one another to make us more courageous, more powerful. How about this? More gracious, right? If I had done everything right in my life, and everything's all hunky dory and everything, guess what? I probably would look down on other people who were struggling. And the beauty of it though is I've had my share of struggle. And it's amazing how then when I see someone else who's struggling, I'm like, you know what? That's my people right there. I'll struggle with you. It causes us, going through the fire, it causes us to be completely different. We see life and people through a completely different lens.
It really makes you stop and appreciate the fact that life has two sides.
Yeah.
There's the joy, and then also the hurt
Yeah.
and the struggle. And while none of us really ask for the struggle, you got to have it in order to appreciate and to be
Sure.
grateful
Yeah.
for the you
Yeah.
know, without losing, what's the point of winning?
Yeah. Yeah. You're exactly right. You can't have sweet without salt. You can't have love without hate. Or maybe, how about this? You can't have love without indifference. And so I think that there are some paradigms there that have, that are, laws, right? Like gravity. I don't necessarily like it, but at the same time, the more you think about it, it's like, you know what? It has to be there. We would be, if everything were hunky dory and there was no brokenness in this world, what would we be? We'd kind of be robots, we would be given an emotion of joy, I guess, but you could call it, a ham sandwich. It would be irrelevant. You have to have the breadth of all of those things, and some choice in there to make, love even worth something. And and I got to say, I like this idea of, you know, like, if someone says I love you, well, what did it cost them? It's pretty hollow if someone loves you because you're really easy to love, right? And they don't have to go out of their way. But even that word, boy, if it cost you something, to really love somebody and pursue them, boy, then that word love takes on a whole new meaning. Like I told you earlier, I grew up in Minnesota, and I moved to Nashville, 30 years ago, and I love it here. Don't get me wrong. But one of the things that I think is kind of funny here is they use the word love, pretty flippantly. Oh, I just love you, and it's sweet, and I get the sentiment. But here's the funny thing. It's, that word, like even the word friendship, man, that holds a much different weight, when you enter into someone's pain. When you love somebody who cannot give something in return to you, and especially when you do it when nobody's watching, that's then, you've got something inside of you that is alien, right? Because
Yeah.
most of the time everybody wants to be noticed that I'm being kind and loving other people at the very least, or they want to love somebody because they want an ego stroke. There's some alternative, motive there. And what I think is fascinating is the cost of love and the secrecy of it, and the intimacy of it is so, can be so powerful.
Which is about that transition in your perspective, really.
Yeah.
I think it in the end, it really does come down to developing that childlike appreciation for life again.
Yeah. Love it.
Way back before you really conceived the notion of the disappointments and of the struggles of life.
Yeah.
And I want you to talk to someone here for a moment that just might be sitting in that moment when they realized it's time to embrace those struggles of life. It's time to look at them through a joyful set of eyes.
Yeah. I think that quite often we tend to shy away from, embracing struggle or looking internally. And part of it is that we don't have support. Those are some scary places to go if you don't have a vocabulary, right? If you don't have somebody kind of holding your hand and saying, you don't need to bite off the entire apple all at the same time here, like, or eat the elephant or whatever it is. So I think that, if someone is listening and they're kind of one foot in, one foot out, or both feet out for that matter, and they're looking in with, fear and anxiety and so on, I would say surround yourself, with people who are good and kind and gracious, who want to, help you with nothing in return. By the way, I'm not an alcoholic, I don't say that with any pride, but I started reading the AA book this week. And I tell you what, I think that's a book that everybody should read. I'm not saying it's the end all be all, but there's some nuggets in there that are just absolutely beautiful. I think I'm on chapter 7 this morning, and it talks about this idea of, just being available for somebody, sharing your story, just like, hey, this is kind of how I've experienced, some healing in my life. And if you want to walk, with me, I'm happy to walk with you, and there's no convincing, there's no arm twisting, there's no, spinning it, there's no nothing. It's just like, hey, I'm a fellow beggar, looking for bread, helping the other one, find it. That's I think a Brennan Manning quote. And I think that's such a beautiful way to operate in life, especially with people who are really down and out, right? Just to say, hey, dude, I'm a fellow beggar looking for bread, just trying to help someone else find a little bread. And if you take that posture and do a lot of listening, oh my gosh, it's amazing how, that type of a person can change the world, let alone someone's life.
I think that's actually very well said. It's all about just breadcrumbs.
Hmm.
You don't have to break down and put the whole apple in your pocket or try to put the whole thing in your mouth. Just
Yeah.
one little thing each day.
Yeah.
One little nugget, as Seneca wrote, helps you along the journey.
Yeah.
And how do you how do you figure out if you're making progress along that journey? Is becoming a better friend to yourself.
Hmm. Yeah. That's it's an interesting thing. This, the concept of bearing fruit, it's amazing when you start to see, you know, yeah, when you start to see fruit, right? Love, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, all that kind of stuff. It's a bit of a barometer as to what's going on inside. And of course, the opposite is true, right? If it's, anger, fragmentation, overwhelm, bitterness, all that kind of stuff, well, there's probably something going on inside that you need some better sustenance. You need to start eating of the tree of life as opposed to whatever tree you're eating from. And by the way, that could be people you're hanging out with and all kinds of stuff because we are largely what we consume on any level.
Absolutely, we are. So speaking of, I'm very grateful that you took the time to make yourself available for this conversation.
Sure, man.
If,
Sure.
if somebody's looking to be fed, how can they reach out to you? What you got going on, coming up, all that good stuff.
Yeah, you know what? I'll throw you a little curveball here. So I have a couple of different worlds that I'm in as an entrepreneur. So I'll mention just a couple of them. So I invented a product that's in 3,700 retail stores. So I do product development. I've got my brother-in-law and I came up with the world's first thermostat guard with a combination lock. So you don't have to worry about people tampering with your thermostat because we all know that can be pretty expensive. And but then also I do some coaching and I do music. So oddly enough, I'm one of those weirdos that moved to Nashville as a vocalist, and I've cut a couple of records and I'm working on some new music as well. But if you want to contact me, for any reason, I'll be happy to help in any capacity. Go to my website, David Osk. So my last name is ASK, like ask a question, but it's davidoskmusic.com.
Well, David, thank you very much. This has been very enjoyable and I think very helpful. So I don't believe in the words goodbye. They're too final. Until we meet again, whether it's this life or the next, I wish you a safe and prosperous journey, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Most definitely.